Commander Tyke stood on the bridge of his massive warship, staring at the strange blue and green planet that slowly turned on his screen. His ship, the Void Piercer, was one of the most powerful vessels in the Galactic Empire's fleet. They had been flying through empty space for weeks, checking distant star systems that nobody cared about. This was supposed to be just another boring patrol mission, but this planet was different. Lieutenant Minji sat at her control station, running scans of the world below them. Her fingers moved quickly across the glowing buttons as streams of data flowed across her monitors. After 30 minutes of careful analysis, she finally looked up with a puzzled expression. "Commander, I finished checking this planet," she said. "The third world in this system has cities, factories, and machines. They're sending out radio signals and have even launched some basic rockets into space." Tyke nodded slowly. This wasn't unusual. The galaxy was full of young civilizations that had just discovered fire or built their first wheel. Most of them would take thousands of years to become advanced enough to matter to the Empire. The standard procedure was simple: mark their location in the database and forget about them until they became interesting. But something felt wrong about this discovery. Tyke had been exploring space for over 30 years. He had seen hundreds of developing worlds. Young civilizations always followed the same predictable pattern. They would spend centuries learning to farm, then centuries more learning to build cities, then even more time discovering basic science. It was a slow, steady process that never changed. "Minji, run a deeper scan," he ordered. "I want to see how fast these creatures have been developing their technology." The lieutenant's hands flew across her controls again. The ship's powerful sensors reached down through the planet's atmosphere, examining the remains of old cities and ancient battlefields. They analyzed the metals in old weapons and the design of forgotten machines. Slowly, a timeline began to appear on the main screen. What they saw made no sense at all. "Commander," Minji said, her voice filled with confusion, "these numbers can't be right. According to our scans, these beings went from flying their first airplane to building nuclear bombs in just 40 years. Then they went from nuclear weapons to space rockets in only 12 more years." Tyke felt his blood run cold. He leaned forward in his command chair, studying the impossible timeline displayed before him. In all his years of service, exploring hundreds of star systems and cataloging dozens of young civilizations, he had never seen anything like this. Normal species took 5,000 years to go from basic flight to nuclear weapons. These humans had done it in 4 decades. Most civilizations needed another 3,000 years to develop space travel after discovering nuclear power. The humans had managed it in 12 years. "Are you certain these readings are correct?" Tyke asked. "I've run the scans 3 times, sir. The data is accurate. These humans seem to learn and adapt faster than any species we've ever encountered." Tyke stood up and walked to the large viewing window. The blue planet hung in space below, them looking peaceful and harmless. But if their scans were accurate, this world contained creatures that could advance their technology at an impossible rate. "Sir, what should we do?" Minji asked. The commander was quiet for a long moment. Standard protocol was clear. Young civilizations were to be monitored but not contacted until they developed faster-than-light travel. That usually took at least 10,000 years. But these humans were advancing so quickly that they might achieve interstellar flight within a few centuries. That could be a problem for the Empire. "Send an encrypted message to Imperial Command," Tyke said finally. "Priority level Alpha. Tell them we've discovered a species that doesn't follow normal development patterns. Request immediate instructions." As Minji began transmitting their report, Tyke continued staring at the planet below. Something told him that this discovery would change everything. The Empire had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years by carefully managing younger civilizations. They allowed them to develop slowly and predictably, then absorbed them when they became useful. But what happened when a species refused to develop slowly? What happened when they advanced too quickly to control? Looking at the strange blue world spinning beneath his ship, Commander Tyke had a feeling they were about to find out. Dr. Yuna sat in her advanced laboratory, deep inside the Empire's most secure research facility. Thin cables connected her brain directly to the facility's main computer. allowing her to process vast amounts of information at incredible speeds. For the past week, she had been studying intercepted communications from the strange planet that Commander Tyke had discovered. As the Empire's top expert on alien species, Yuna had analyzed the behavior patterns of over 300 different civilizations. She understood how young species thought, how they developed, and how they could be controlled. But these humans were completely different from anything she had ever encountered. The research team gathered around her in the sterile, white meeting room. General Do-yun, the Empire's most experienced military commander, sat across from her with his arms crossed. His face bore the scars of countless battles fought on distant worlds. Analyst Bora, a brilliant young woman who specialized in predicting how civilizations would develop, sat nearby with her tablet ready to take notes. "What have you learned about these humans?" General Do-yun asked impatiently. He had conquered over 50 worlds during his long career and didn't understand why one primitive planet required so much attention. Dr. Yuna activated the holographic display in the center of the room. Images began floating in the air showing human cities, armies, and battlefields. "Their way of fighting wars is unlike anything we've seen before," she began. "Most species we encounter either work together peacefully or fight each other constantly. Humans do both at the same time." She gestured to a series of images showing human conflicts throughout their history. They can cooperate on a massive scale when facing a common threat, but they can also be incredibly brutal to their enemies. This combination makes them extremely unpredictable. General Do-yun leaned forward, studying the floating images with professional interest. "Every species fights wars, Doctor. I've seen plenty of brutal conflicts across the galaxy. What makes these humans so special?" Yuna pulled up new data showing Earth's recent history. "They've almost destroyed themselves multiple times, General. They created weapons powerful enough to wipe out their entire planet and actually used them in warfare. They poisoned their own environment so badly that their climate began changing. They've survived diseases that killed millions of their people. And yet they're still here," added Bora, reading from her analysis reports. "Every time they face extinction, they find a way to not just survive, but to become stronger than before." The holographic display showed a timeline of human development after their most destructive global war. Cities rising from ashes, new technologies being developed, populations growing rapidly. "Look at their recovery rate," Yuna continued. "After their biggest war ended, they rebuilt their entire civilization in just 20 years. 3 years after that, they had landed on their moon." General Do-yun studied the combat footage that Yuna had compiled from Earth's military conflicts. He watched human soldiers fighting against impossible odds, never giving up even when their situation was hopeless. He saw troops carrying wounded comrades through dangerous territory instead of leaving them behind. He witnessed ordinary civilians risking their lives to protect complete strangers. "This doesn't make sense," the general muttered. "Most species either surrender when facing superior force, or they scatter and fight as individuals trying to save themselves. These humans do something completely different." Yuna nodded as she highlighted more data points. "When humans are threatened, as a group, they become more dangerous, not less. It's as if facing extinction activates some kind of survival response that we don't fully understand. They stop thinking about individual survival and start thinking about species survival." She showed footage of human communities working together during natural disasters, sharing resources and helping strangers without expecting anything in return. Then she showed the same communities organizing into deadly fighting forces when threatened by outside enemies. They have this strange ability to shift between extreme cooperation and extreme aggression depending on the situation, Yuna explained. When they're safe, they argue among themselves and compete for resources. But when they're threatened from outside, they unite instantly and become incredibly focused on destroying the threat. Analyst Bora looked up from her tablet with concern. "Dr. Yuna, I've been running projections based on your data. If these humans continue developing at their current rate, they could become a serious challenge to imperial authority within a few centuries." General Do-yun's expression grew serious. In his long military career, he had never encountered a species that imperial forces couldn't easily defeat. The Empire's standard strategy was simple: appear with overwhelming force, demand surrender, and most civilizations would submit rather than face destruction. "You're suggesting these humans might actually fight back?" he asked. Dr. Yuna's expression was grim as she looked at the data flowing through her neural interface. "General, I'm suggesting that threatening them might be the worst possible strategy. Everything in their history shows that they become most dangerous when they have nothing left to lose." The massive doors of the Imperial Council chamber sealed shut with a heavy thud that echoed through the enormous room. Emperor Wusung sat at the head of a curved table made from polished black stone that had been quarried from the first world the Empire had ever conquered. The table was a symbol of imperial power. It had witnessed the decisions that shaped the fate of thousands of worlds over 10,000 years. Today, they were deciding the fate of one small blue planet called Earth. The Emperor's most trusted advisors sat around the table, each representing a different aspect of imperial power. These were the people who had helped him build the largest empire in galactic history. Their decisions had determined whether entire civilizations would live in peace as imperial subjects or be wiped from existence. The silence in the room was heavy as Emperor Wusung slowly read through the final reports about humanity. His weathered hands turned each page carefully, his ancient eyes scanning every detail that Dr. Yuna and her team had compiled. The other council members waited patiently. No one dared speak before the Emperor had finished reading. Finally, Emperor Wusung set the reports aside and looked up at his advisors. "The floor is open for discussion," he said in his deep, commanding voice. War Marshal Kyung immediately stood up, his military uniform gleaming with medals from 100 conquered worlds. He was a man who believed that every problem could be solved with sufficient firepower. "Your Majesty, the solution is obvious. We should attack these humans immediately while they're still weak." He activated the holographic display above the table, showing images of Earth's primitive military forces. "Look at their weapons, their ships, their defenses. They're using chemical rockets and metal bullets. One of our battle groups could destroy their entire planet in less than a week." Minister Hana, the Empire's chief economist, shook her head firmly. She was responsible for making sure imperial military actions were profitable. "War Marshal Kyung, your solution is expensive and pointless. I've analyzed Earth's resources and strategic position. They have nothing we need." She pulled up her own holographic charts showing economic data. "Their planet contains the same common metals and materials we can find on a million other worlds. They're located in an empty sector with no trade routes or military value. Attacking them would cost more than we could ever gain." "But Minister," General Do-hyun interrupted, "you're not considering the long-term threat." The scarred veteran had fought on more battlefields than anyone else in the room. "These humans develop technology faster than any species we've ever encountered. Today they're primitive, but what about tomorrow?" He stood and pointed to the timeline Dr. Yuna had created. "In 50 years, they might have weapons that can challenge our ships. In 100 years, they could be knocking on our borders. It's better to deal with them now while we still can." War Marshal Kyung laughed loudly, the sound echoing off the chamber's high ceiling. 50 years? General, the Empire has ruled this galaxy for 10,000 years. We've conquered species that had millions of years to develop their technology. What could one primitive world possibly accomplish in just 50 years? "That's exactly the problem," General Do-hyun replied grimly. "We don't know what they're capable of because they don't follow the normal rules." The debate continued for over an hour. Some advisors argued for immediate military action. Others wanted to ignore the humans completely. A few suggested establishing trade relations or sending diplomatic missions. But Emperor Wusong remained silent, listening carefully to every argument. Finally, he raised his hand, and the chamber fell completely quiet. Every person in the room turned to look at their absolute ruler. Emperor Wusong had built his empire through careful planning and calculated risks. He never made hasty decisions, and he never let emotions cloud his judgment. "Dr. Yuna," the Emperor said, his voice carrying easily through the silent chamber, "you've studied these humans more closely than anyone. In your professional opinion as our leading expert on alien species, what would happen if we simply left them alone?" Dr. Yuna consulted the neural interface connected to her brain, accessing all the data she had collected about human behavior and development patterns. After a few moments, she looked up with an untroubled expression. Your Majesty, I cannot give you a definitive answer. Humans don't fit any of the established development models we use to predict how civilizations will evolve. Based on our historical data, they could stagnate and remain primitive forever. They could destroy themselves in another war, or... She paused, clearly uncomfortable with what she was about to say. Or what, Doctor? The Emperor asked. Or they could surpass our current technological capabilities within a century. The chamber erupted in surprised murmurs, but Emperor Wusong remained calm. He had ruled for over 1,000 years by making difficult decisions based on incomplete information. This was just another calculated risk. We will follow standard Imperial protocol, he announced. Send one ship to deliver the standard ultimatum. If they submit peacefully, they become a client species under Imperial protection. If they choose to resist... He didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone in the room knew what happened to species that defied the Empire. Captain June gripped the armrests of his command chair as his massive warship shuddered back into normal space. The Imperial Fist was one of the most feared vessels in the galaxy, a 3-kilometer-long monster of dark metal and deadly weapons that had brought countless worlds to their knees. Its very appearance in a star system was usually enough to make entire civilizations surrender without firing a single shot. The bridge crew worked quietly at their stations as the ship's powerful engines finished their transition from hyperspace. Through the enormous viewing windows, Captain June could see the small yellow star that the humans called their sun. Somewhere in this unremarkable solar system was the blue planet that had caused so much discussion in the Imperial Council. Captain, we've entered the outer edge of the human solar system, reported Navigation Officer Minho from his control station. All systems are operating normally. We're currently 8 hours away from the target planet at standard approach speed. Captain. June nodded and activated his command console. He had performed this same duty dozens of times during his 30-year career. The routine was always identical: arrive with overwhelming force, deliver the ultimatum, wait for surrender, then either accept their submission or destroy their world. Simple and effective. Communications Officer Subin looked up from her station with a professional expression. Captain, I'm ready to broadcast the standard Imperial ultimatum on all frequencies. Our universal translator has identified 847 different human languages and is prepared to deliver the message simultaneously in each one. Proceed, June ordered. The ship's powerful transmitters activated, sending the message toward Earth at the speed of light. The ultimatum was the same one that had been used for thousands of years, translated into every known language in the galaxy. It was simple, direct, and left no room for misunderstanding. People of Earth, the message began, you are now under the authority of the Galactic Empire. Your world has been selected for incorporation into Imperial territory. You are commanded to surrender immediately and submit to Imperial rule. Resistance is futile and will result in the complete destruction of your planet. You have 7 standard days to comply with this order. Captain June watched the distant blue planet on his main display screen. Earth looked so small and peaceful from this distance. It was hard to believe that such an insignificant world had required the personal attention of the Emperor himself. His ship alone carried enough firepower to turn the planet's surface into molten rock within a few hours. Sir, called out Weapons Officer Sanghyun, should I prepare a demonstration of our capabilities? Excellent idea, June replied. This was standard procedure when dealing with primitive civilizations. Many species didn't truly understand the threat they faced until they saw Imperial weapons in action. The weapons officer's fingers moved across his controls, targeting a large asteroid that was drifting through the outer solar system. The asteroid was roughly the size of a human city, large enough to make an impressive display, but small enough that its destruction wouldn't affect anything important. Main plasma cannon charged and ready, sir. Fire. The Imperial Fist's primary weapon system activated with a deep humming sound that vibrated through the ship's hull. A brilliant beam of superheated plasma erupted from the warship's forward section, crossing the darkness of space in seconds. When it struck the asteroid, the massive rock simply ceased to exist. Where there had been solid stone and metal, now there was only glowing dust scattered across thousands of kilometers. Executive Officer Jinwoo chuckled as he watched the display. "Think they got the message, Captain?" June studied the electromagnetic activity that was erupting from Earth's surface. The planet's primitive communication networks were lighting up with frantic transmissions as news of the Imperial arrival spread across their world. Radio signals, television broadcasts, and internet traffic were all showing massive spikes in activity. "They always do," he replied confidently. "Fear is a universal language." But as Captain June continued monitoring Earth's communications, something began to bother him. He had delivered Imperial ultimatums to dozens of primitive worlds, and the pattern was always the same. First came shock and disbelief, then panic and chaos, followed quickly by desperate attempts to negotiate or immediate surrender. The humans were definitely shocked and panicked, but their response seemed different somehow. Instead of the usual, scattered confusion, their military forces were organizing rapidly. Their government leaders were holding emergency meetings and coordinating with each other rather than preparing individual surrender statements. "Captain," Communications Officer Subin called out with surprise in her voice, "we're receiving a transmission from Earth." June raised an eyebrow. "Already? That's much faster than usual. Most primitive civilizations needed several days to overcome their initial shock and formulate any kind of response. The fact that humans were already attempting to communicate was unusual, but not necessarily significant. "Are they surrendering?" he asked. Subin listened to her translation equipment for a moment, then looked up with a confused expression. "No. So they're not surrendering. They're requesting additional time to prepare their response to our ultimatum." Captain June blinked in surprise. In his 30 years of Imperial service, delivering ultimatums to primitive worlds across the galaxy, no species had ever asked for extra time to prepare a response. They either surrendered immediately or chose to fight and die. There had never been a third option. "How much additional time are they requesting?" he asked. 30 days, sir." The bridge fell silent as everyone processed this unprecedented request. Captain June stared at the communication display, trying to understand what the humans were thinking. What could a primitive civilization possibly need 30 days to prepare? They had no weapons that could threaten an Imperial warship. They had no allies who might come to their aid. Their fate was already sealed, but something about their request made him deeply uncomfortable. The massive Olympic Stadium in Seoul had never hosted an event like this. Representatives from every nation on Earth sat in the packed arena, their faces illuminated by the glow of emergency lighting that had been hastily installed overnight. Outside, the alien warship hung in the sky like a terrible star that could be seen even in broad daylight, reminding everyone of the impossible threat humanity now faced. President Seonho walked slowly to the podium at the center of the stadium floor. The weight of representing the entire human species pressed down on his shoulders as he looked out at the assembled delegates. These were people who had spent their careers arguing about borders, trade agreements, and political differences. Today, none of that mattered anymore. The stadium fell completely silent as he began to speak. His voice was amplified through speakers that carried his words to every corner of the arena, and from there to communication networks around the world. Every television station, radio broadcaster, and internet platform was carrying this speech. Live to billions of people who were waiting to learn their fate. "My fellow humans," President Seonho began, his voice steady despite the enormity of the moment. "Today marks the first time in our long history that we face an enemy that threatens not just our countries or our governments, but our very existence as a species." Advanced translation systems worked instantly to carry his words in every major language on Earth. People in Tokyo heard him speak in Japanese, families in Mexico City listened in Spanish, and communities across Africa received the message in dozens of local languages. For the first time ever, the entire human race was listening to the same message at the same time. The message from this galactic empire was simple and direct, President Seonho continued. "They have given us a choice. Surrender completely to their rule, or watch our world be destroyed. They believe these are our only two options." Defense Minister So-young stepped up to join him at the podium. She was a small woman, but her voice carried the strength of someone who had spent her entire career preparing for the unthinkable. But they have made a critical error in their understanding of humanity, she declared. The massive screens around the stadium came to life, showing images from human history. Ancient warriors standing against impossible odds, ordinary people fighting for their freedom, soldiers refusing to abandon their comrades even when death was certain. The images showed humanity at its most desperate and most heroic moments. They assume we will choose between submission and death, Minister Soyoung said, her voice rising with passion. They don't understand that humans always find a third option. When faced with impossible circumstances, we don't surrender and we don't give up. We fight. The stadium erupted in thunderous applause and cheers. Representatives who had arrived as enemies from different nations were now standing together, united by a threat that made their previous conflicts seem meaningless. Ancient disputes between countries that had lasted for centuries suddenly felt insignificant compared to the possibility of human extinction. Dr. Moonho, a quiet scientist who had spent his entire career working on projects so secret that most governments didn't know they existed, walked nervously to the podium. He had never spoken to such a large audience before, but the time for secrecy was over. For 70 years, he began, his voice growing stronger as he spoke, we have been preparing for this moment. Every time a strange object fell from the sky, every mysterious signal we detected from space, every piece of unknown technology we discovered, we studied it, we learned from it, and we prepared. The screens around the stadium changed to show images that made the audience gasp in amazement. Sleek spacecraft that looked nothing like human technology sat in vast underground hangars. Advanced weapons systems were hidden beneath mountains. Entire cities had been built in secret locations around the world. Project Exodus is not just an evacuation plan, Dr. Moonho explained. It is humanity's insurance policy. For decades, we have been building the tools and technology necessary to ensure that our species will survive no matter what happens to Earth. General Hyunwoo, the supreme commander of the newly formed Earth Defense Alliance, stepped forward with the bearing of a career soldier. His uniform displayed medals from a dozen different countries, representing a military career that had spanned conflicts across the globe. The Galactic Empire expects us to sit on our homeworld like frightened animals, waiting for them to decide our fate, he said with quiet intensity. They are about to learn what happens when you threaten a species that has spent thousands of years perfecting the art of warfare. President Seonho returned to the center of the podium for his closing remarks. The stadium was completely silent now, with billions of people around the world hanging on his every word. We have been given 30 days, he said firmly, but we will not use those 30 days to prepare our surrender. We will use them to prepare for the fight of our lives. We will use them to show this galactic empire that humanity does not kneel to anyone. The crowd rose to their feet in thunderous applause that seemed to shake the very foundations of the stadium. Outside, the alien ship continued its silent vigil, unaware that it had just witnessed the moment when humanity chose to make its stand. Dr. Ariam had not slept in 3 days, but her eyes remained bright with determination as she worked in her secret laboratory buried deep beneath the Swiss Alps. Through the reinforced windows of her underground facility, she could see massive cargo ships launching into the sky every few minutes, their engines roaring as they carried precious human lives to safety among the stars. The transformation happening across Earth was unlike anything in human history. Cities that had taken decades to build were being evacuated in days. Factories that had produced cars and computers were now manufacturing weapons and spacecraft. The entire planet had become a massive war machine operating at impossible speed. Dr. Harrison, can you give me an update on the evacuation progress? She called to her assistant, Junho, who was monitoring refugee movements from his control station. Junho looked up from his multiple computer screens, each one showing streams of data about humanity's desperate exodus from Earth. We've successfully relocated 60% of non-essential population to the outer colonies, he reported. The Mars facilities are completely overcrowded, but they're still accepting more refugees. The asteroid mining stations have been converted into temporary shelters. Ariam nodded and turned back to the quantum computer that hummed softly beside her workstation. The machine was processing calculations so complex that Earth's most powerful Supercomputers would have needed decades to complete them. But this was no ordinary computer. It had been built using technology reverse-engineered from alien artifacts that had been secretly collected for over 70 years. Every crashed probe that had fallen to Earth, every fragment of unknown metal that had been recovered from remote locations, every mysterious signal that had been detected from deep space, all of it had been studied, analyzed, and gradually understood by teams of scientists working in facilities so secret that most world leaders didn't know they existed. Dr. Ariam. Dr. Namju's excited voice crackled through the laboratory's communication system from his research facility in Antarctica. We've achieved a major breakthrough in the faster-than-light drive project. We've successfully replicated the Imperial hyperspace entry protocols. The news sent a wave of excitement through the laboratory. For decades, human scientists had dreamed of achieving interstellar travel, but the physics seemed impossible. Now, with alien technology to guide them, they had accomplished in weeks what might have taken centuries of normal research. Similar scenes were playing out in hidden facilities across the planet. Deep beneath the streets of Beijing, engineers worked around the clock in massive underground complexes, assembling humanity's first squadron of plasma-powered fighter craft. The ships looked nothing like traditional human aircraft. Their sleek designs had been copied from wreckage recovered from alien crashes decades earlier. In the Sahara Desert, enormous construction machines worked day and night, building railgun installations that rose from the sand like metal mountains. These weapons were capable of firing projectiles at incredible speeds, and their targeting systems were already locked onto the Imperial dreadnought that hung arrogantly in Earth's sky. General Hyunwoo stood in the Alliance's new command center, a facility that had been carved out of solid rock beneath the Rocky Mountains in just 2 weeks. The walls were covered with screens showing military activity from 6 continents, as humanity's combined armed forces prepared for a war unlike any they had ever fought. "I need a complete status report on our defensive preparations," the general commanded his staff. Colonel Ji-young looked up from her tactical display. "Sir, all major population centers have been successfully evacuated. Our strategic military reserves have been moved to secure underground locations. The deep bunker networks that we've been building in secret for the past 50 years are now fully operational and stocked with supplies." "What about our naval assets?" General Hyunwoo asked. "Admiral Sunwoo reports that our fleet has been dispersed throughout the solar system and is currently running in complete silence. All ships are hidden behind asteroids, moons, and space debris. They're ready to execute coordinated strikes on your command." High above Earth, Captain Jun continued his patient wait aboard the Imperial Fist. He had sent several requests to Imperial Command asking for permission to begin the bombardment early, but his orders were crystal clear. Allow the humans their full 30 days to contemplate surrender. The captain assumed that the frantic activity he was observing on Earth's surface was simply panic and chaos. Most primitive species went through a period of desperate, useless preparation before accepting the inevitable. He had seen it dozens of times during his career. But Captain Jun was wrong. Humanity wasn't preparing to surrender. They weren't even preparing to defend their homeworld in a traditional sense. Instead, they were doing something that no species in galactic history had ever attempted. They were turning Earth itself into the largest military trap ever conceived, while simultaneously ensuring that human civilization would survive, even if their homeworld was destroyed. In just 30 days, they were attempting to achieve what most species took centuries to accomplish. The Imperial ship waited patiently in space, unaware that every day it remained gave humanity more time to prepare for a fight that would change the galaxy forever. Captain Jun stood on the bridge of his massive warship, watching the sensor displays with growing confusion. For 30 days, he had observed the frantic activity on Earth's surface, assuming it was just the typical panic that primitive species displayed when faced with Imperial might. But something about the human response was bothering him more each day. "Captain, I'm detecting multiple objects launching from Earth's surface," reported Communications Officer Subin from her station. Her voice carried a note of puzzlement that made June turn to look at her display screens. Through the bridges, massive viewing windows, he could see tiny points of light rising from the blue planet below. The objects were clearly spacecraft, but they weren't heading toward his ship in any kind of attack formation. Instead, they seemed to be fleeing the planet entirely. "Analysis shows they're civilian transport vessels, sir," Subin continued. "No. Weapons detected. They appear to be heading toward the outer planets in this solar system." Captain June nodded dismissively. This was exactly what he had expected to see. When faced with inevitable conquest, most primitive species would attempt to evacuate their leadership and important citizens to remote locations. It was a futile gesture, but it made the survivors feel like they were doing something useful. "Let them run," he said with a casual wave of his hand. "A few thousand refugees hiding on distant moons won't matter once we've conquered their homeworld. We'll round them up later." But as the days passed, the stream of evacuating ships continued without stopping. Captain June's tactical computers began analyzing the evacuation, and the numbers they calculated didn't make sense. According to his ship's sensors, nearly 2 billion humans had left Earth during the past month. That was impossible. No primitive civilization possessed enough spacecraft to evacuate that many people in such a short time. When his ship had first arrived 30 days ago, the humans barely had enough technology to reach their own moon. Now, they were somehow moving their entire population to colonies throughout their solar system. Even more puzzling was the fact that many of the ships didn't match any designs in Imperial databases. They were sleek, advanced-looking vessels that seemed to use technology far beyond what humans should have possessed. Some of them were even larger and more sophisticated than Imperial transport ships. "Sir, we're receiving a final communication." "From Earth," Subin announced on the 30th day of their wait. Captain June straightened in his command chair. Finally, the moment he had been waiting for. After 30 days of watching humans scurry around like insects, their leaders were ready to deliver their surrender. He would accept their submission graciously, then begin the process of incorporating Earth into the Empire. "Put the transmission through to the main screen," he ordered. The image that appeared showed a middle-aged human man standing in what looked like an empty government building. The man wore a military uniform with insignia that suggested high rank, and his expression was remarkably calm for someone about to surrender his entire species to alien conquest. "Captain of the Imperial vessel," the human began, speaking in heavily accented but perfectly understandable Galactic Standard language. "I am General Hyunwoo of the United Earth Alliance. We have carefully considered your ultimatum and prepared our official response." Captain June leaned forward slightly in his chair. This was the moment every Imperial captain lived for, the formal surrender of another primitive world to the Empire's eternal glory. He prepared to accept their submission with the dignity befitting an Imperial officer. "We categorically reject your Empire's demands," General Hyunwoo continued in the same calm tone. "The people of Earth will never submit to alien rule. Therefore, Earth hereby formally declares war on the Galactic Empire." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Captain June staring at a blank screen in complete shock. For several long seconds, the bridge was completely silent as the crew processed what they had just heard. In the entire 10,000-year history of Imperial expansion, no primitive species had ever declared war on the Empire. They either surrendered immediately or fought desperate defensive battles while begging for mercy. The concept of a technologically inferior civilization actually declaring war was so unprecedented that Imperial protocols didn't even cover the situation. "Sir," Subin's voice carried uncertainty and fear, "should we begin planetary bombardment procedures?" Before Captain June could respond, his tactical officer suddenly shouted from across the bridge, "Captain, I'm detecting multiple high-energy signatures appearing throughout the solar system. Unknown vessels are decloaking all around us." June spun toward the tactical display and felt his blood turn to ice water. Dozens of sleek, obviously human-built warships were materializing from empty space, appearing as if they had been invisible just moments before. The ships surrounded his lone dreadnought in a perfect tactical formation, their weapons already charged and ready to fire. The vessel designs were unlike anything in Imperial databases. They were elegant and deadly-looking, with energy readings. That suggested technology far more advanced than anything humans should have possessed. Some of them were nearly as large as his own massive dreadnought. "How is this possible?" Captain June whispered, his voice barely audible over the sudden alarms that were now blaring throughout his ship. His question was answered by brilliant flashes of plasma fire erupting from 6 different directions simultaneously as the human fleet opened fire on the Imperial Fist with weapons that should not have existed. Admiral Sun Wu stood calmly on the bridge of his flagship, the Indomitable, watching as brilliant flashes of plasma fire lit up the darkness of space around the massive Imperial warship. His human fleet had been hiding in complete silence for weeks, concealed behind asteroids and planetary bodies throughout the solar system, waiting for exactly this moment. The Imperial dreadnought was an impressive sight, nearly twice the size of Earth's largest military vessel and bristling with weapons that could destroy entire cities. Its dark metal hull had struck fear into countless civilizations across the galaxy, but now it was surrounded by dozens of human ships that moved with deadly precision, their coordinated attacks overwhelming the alien vessel's defenses. "Admiral, the enemy ship's energy shields are fluctuating under our concentrated fire," reported Weapons Officer Tae Hyun from his control station. "We're causing significant damage to their defensive systems." "Good, but remember our objectives," Admiral Sun Wu replied firmly. "Target their engines and weapons systems only. We want them disabled and captured, not destroyed. This ship contains technology and information that could be invaluable to our war effort." Communications Officer Gayung looked up from her station with urgency in her voice. "Admiral, the Imperial ship is attempting to send a distress signal toward deep space. They're trying to contact other Empire vessels." "Jam their communications immediately," Sun Wu ordered without hesitation. "I want a complete communication blackout. Nothing gets in or out. The Empire cannot know what happened here until we're ready to tell them." The human fleet's electronic warfare systems activated, flooding the area with interference that blocked all Imperial transmissions. The alien captain would find himself completely cut off from his own forces, unable to call for help or even report what was happening. The Imperial dreadnought was certainly impressive to look at, but Admiral Sun Wu knew its weakness. The ship had been designed as a tool of intimidation, meant to appear over primitive worlds and frighten them into immediate surrender. It was built to look terrifying and deliver overwhelming firepower against defenseless targets. But it wasn't. Designed to fight an actual naval battle against an enemy that had spent 30 years studying its weaknesses. "Direct hit on their primary plasma cannon array," Tae Hyun called out excitedly. "Their main weapons are completely offline, Admiral." Sun Wu activated the fleet-wide communication channel that connected him to every human ship in the solar system. "All units, this is Admiral Sun Wu. Implement Protocol 7 immediately. Begin Phase 2 of our operation." Across the solar system, installations that had been hidden for decades suddenly revealed their true purpose. Massive railgun batteries that had been concealed beneath Earth's surface fired in perfect sequence, sending tungsten projectiles racing through space toward predetermined Imperial patrol routes at incredible speeds. Orbital platforms that had spent years disguising themselves as innocent communication satellites suddenly deployed weapons arrays and defensive systems. What the Empire had assumed were primitive human technologies were actually sophisticated military installations that had been waiting for this exact moment. But the real surprise was planet Earth itself. Deep beneath the planet's surface, in facilities, carved out of solid rock over the past 50 years, a network of quantum resonance generators began humming with barely contained power. The technology had been reverse-engineered from fragments of Imperial probe ships that had crashed on Earth decades earlier. Chief Engineer Min Jae monitored the generators from his control station buried miles underground beneath the Rocky Mountains. "Admiral, the gravitational distortion field is reaching maximum power," he reported through the communication system. "The Imperial vessel is now completely trapped in our artificial gravity well." The technology was beyond anything humans should have possessed. By manipulating quantum fields deep within Earth's core, they had turned their entire planet into a massive gravitational weapon. Space and time itself bent around Earth as the generators reached full power, creating an inescapable trap for any ship caught within the field. The proud Imperial dreadnought, which had intimidated and conquered over 1,000 worlds during its service, suddenly found itself completely helpless. Its powerful hyperspace drives were useless against the gravitational distortion. Its massive engines could barely maintain position against the crushing force that held it in place. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the Imperial ship," Gayung announced. "Put it through to the main screen," Sun Wu replied. Captain Jun's face appeared on the display, but the arrogant Imperial officer who had delivered the ultimatum 30 days earlier was gone. In his place was a frightened man whose voice shook with barely controlled panic. "This is impossible," the captain said, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Your species doesn't possess this level of technology. This equipment shouldn't exist." Admiral Sun Wu looked directly into the camera with a grim smile. "Captain Jun, you and your empire made the same mistake that every bully throughout history has made. You assumed that your victims would remain victims forever. You never considered that we might become stronger than you." Emperor Wu Sung sat alone in his vast throne room, reading report after report that contained information he could barely believe. For 10,000 years, the Galactic Empire had ruled the galaxy with absolute authority. No primitive civilization had ever challenged imperial power. But now somehow everything was changing. The massive screens around his throne displayed star maps, showing the current state of the Empire. Red warning indicators flashed across dozens of systems, each one representing a crisis that his military commanders couldn't explain. At the center of it all was a single human ship that hung motionless just beyond the Imperial capital system's defensive perimeter. The ship was small compared to Imperial dreadnoughts, but its very presence here was impossible. 31 days. Ergo humans had barely possessed the technology to reach their own moon. Now one of their vessels had somehow traveled across the galaxy to appear at the heart of Imperial space. "This is Captain Yunji of the Earth vessel Defiance," the transmission repeated endlessly on all frequencies. "The Galactic Empire has made a grave error in judgment. Humanity does not surrender to threats. Humanity does not submit to bullies. Humanity adapts and overcomes." The message was being broadcast across the entire Imperial capital system, reaching every ship, space station, and planetary colony. Billions of Imperial citizens were hearing it, and Emperor Wu Sung knew that word would spread quickly throughout the galaxy. War Marshal Qiang burst through the throne room doors without waiting for permission to enter. His face was pale with shock, and his hands shook as he carried a data pad filled with urgent military reports. "Your Majesty," he said breathlessly, "we've completely lost contact with 17 border systems. Our patrol fleets throughout the outer territories are reporting that human vessels are appearing everywhere, seemingly from nowhere." Emperor Wu Sung felt a cold chill run down his spine. "How many human ships are we talking about, War Marshal?" "We don't know, sir. That's the problem. They're using some kind of advanced stealth technology that we can't detect or understand. Our sensors show empty space one moment, then suddenly a human warship appears and disappears again. We estimate there could be hundreds of their vessels, operating in Imperial space or possibly thousands." The Emperor turned to Dr. Yuna, who stood quietly nearby with her neural interface glowing as streams of data flowed through her consciousness. She had been analyzing every piece of information about the human situation, trying to understand how this impossible scenario had developed. "Dr. Yuna," the Emperor said, "give me your professional assessment of what has happened." Dr. Yuna's expression was grim as she looked up from her data analysis. "Your Majesty, the humans have accomplished something that no species in galactic history has ever attempted. Instead of trying to defend their homeworld against our ultimatum, they evacuated their entire population and turned Earth itself into a massive weapon." She activated a holographic display, showing what Imperial sensors had detected in the human solar system. Their technology appears to be based on reverse-engineered Imperial equipment that they've somehow advanced far beyond our current capabilities. They've essentially leapfrogged thousands of years of normal technological development in just 30 days. War Marshal Qiang shook his head in disbelief. "That's completely impossible, Doctor. They were primitives just 1 month ago. They were using chemical rockets and metal weapons." "No, War Marshal," Emperor Wu Sung said slowly, the terrible truth finally dawning on him. "They were primitives 1 month ago, but we gave them 30 days to become something else entirely. We gave them time to prepare, and they used that time better than we ever imagined possible. The human transmission suddenly changed. Captain Yunji's face disappeared from the screens, replaced by an elderly man in simple civilian clothing. Despite his plain appearance, the man's eyes held the quiet confidence of someone who had just achieved the impossible. "I am President Seonho of the United Earth Alliance," the man said calmly. "Your empire has declared war on humanity by threatening our homeworld with destruction. We formally accept your declaration of war." He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in across the imperial capital system before continuing. "For 10,000 years, your empire has conquered primitive worlds by appearing with overwhelming force and demanding immediate surrender. You've grown accustomed to civilizations that collapse in fear at the first sign of imperial power. But you have never encountered a species that treats your ultimatum as a challenge rather than a death sentence." The transmission ended, leaving Emperor Wusung alone with his thoughts. In just 1 month, humanity had transformed from a minor entry in imperial databases to an existential threat to galactic stability. They had done something that the Empire's greatest military minds had considered impossible. "Your Majesty," War Marshal Kyung asked hesitantly, "what are your orders? Should we mobilize the full imperial fleet?" Emperor Wusung continued staring at the human ship hanging in space beyond his defenses. He knew that similar vessels were appearing throughout his empire, and his military forces seemed powerless to stop them. For the first time in his 1,000-year reign, he faced an enemy that couldn't be intimidated, bribed, or easily destroyed. "Send a message to the human ship," he said finally, his voice carrying the weight of a decision that would change galactic history. "Tell them I wish to arrange a meeting. It appears that this galaxy has room for 2 apex predators after all." Far away in the depths of space, Captain Yunji smiled as she received the imperial transmission. Humanity had taken its first step toward claiming their place among the stars, and the galaxy would never be the same again.